bit of it. I would like to talk a little bit about a lesson before dying. I was teaching at the University of Southwestern Louisiana when I came up with the idea for a lesson before dying. That would be around 83 or 84. The original idea was that the story would occur in the early 80s. I wrote a letter to the warden at Angola, State Prison of Louisiana, informing him who I was, that I was a teacher at USL, that I was the author of the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman and several other books, that I had another novel in mind about a prisoner on death row, and would he, the warden, mind if I asked him a few questions? Question number one, would it be possible for someone not kin to the condemned man, who is not a minister of religion or his legal advisor, to visit him on death row? About a week later, I received a letter from the warden's office informing me that the warden would not be able to guarantee me that kind of security. I immediately wrote a second letter assuring the warden that I, Ernest J. Gaines, had no intention of visiting Angola on a regular basis, but that I was writing a novel, and I emphasized the word novel, and I was wondering if it were possible that such a person, a teacher, for example, would visit the condemned man. Well, the warden's office never did answer my second letter, and maybe that was a blessing in disguise. Being writer and resident on any university campus, you're constantly being asked, how's the writing coming along? And when can we expect the next book? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. A Gathering of Old Men had been published in 83, so between 83 and 85, I was between books. That is, I was not writing. When a colleague of mine at USL asked me what I was doing, I told him that I had a novel in mind, that I had written the warden at Angola, and I told him the result of my second letter. I gave him the general plot of the novel. A young man being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he being charged with a murder. Paul Nolan, my colleague, told me that he knew of a case that I might be interested in reading. The case Paul was referring to concerned a young man, a 17-year-old boy, who had been sentenced to be executed in the electric chair in the state of Louisiana. Something happened with the chair, and it did not operate properly, and the boy was not executed and put back into his cell to await what next step the governor would take. Paul told me he had realized that the two cases were different, but that I might benefit by reading his case, and that he had a lot of material about the case if I chose to do so. This particular case he spoke of happened in 46 or 47, a period familiar to me, and a time that I had written about in previous stories, The Sky is Gray, Three Men, and in the novel Of Love and Dust. Besides that, the case Paul Nolan referred to happened only a few miles from where we were now teaching, and no more than 70 miles from where I had lived as a child, and the area where most of my previous stories had taken place. There were so many similarities in work, religion, food, the people ate, and everything. So the case Paul recommended to read could have happened in the parish where I grew up. The stories are different. Still, I would use some of the information from his story, his case. Both young men are black, both illiterate. Both were involved in the murder of a white man. In Paul's case, the young man confessed to the murder. My young man would always maintain his innocence to the end. No defense witnesses were called in either case. Only white men served on both juries. This was the 40s, so there were no women, and of course, no black on the jury. After reading all the material that Paul had given me, I asked myself, why not bring my story back to the 40s? If I put the story in the 40s, there was so much material that I could use. I would use the plantation as home for my characters. I knew life on a plantation because I had written about it in several other books. Miss Jane Pittman of Love and Dust, The Stories in Bloodline. I could use the church school for background. The church where for generations my folks had worshiped and where I had attended school my first 6 years. I could use the crop as background. When it was planted, when it was harvested. I knew the food the people ate. I knew the kind of clothes they wore. I knew the songs they sang in the fields and in the church. So the best thing to do was bring my story back to the 40s, a period I knew and where I was most comfortable. I read everything Paul Nolan gave me to read and all he recommended. This young man would lose and be executed a year and a week to the day he was first placed in that chair. The case had gotten much publicity for the 40s, had gone all the way to the Supreme Court in Washington, but lost by decision 5-4. Because I teach creative writing at the university and because I teach at night, I have a chance to draw people from outside the university, and I always get lawyers. I've had one or more lawyers in every class since I started teaching at the university in '81. All have the dreams of being a Scott Turow or John Grisham, I suppose. One of my students had a condemned man on death row, and I would always ask him questions about his client, especially what emotion did he show, knowing that he was going to die on a certain day at a certain hour. I could always tell when my student had visited his client by the drained, wasted look he brought into the classroom. He was much older than this young man, and over a period of years had gotten very close to him. He had gotten too emotionally involved, and he knew it, and it showed. This student of mine, helped me in many ways. He brought me pictures of the state prison, of the cell blocks, pictures of the electric chair, just called Gruesome Gertie. I asked him more questions. I asked him what kind of wood was the chair made of? How much did the chair weigh? How wide and thick were the straps that went around the arms and legs of the condemned? And I kept a picture of the chair on my desk, especially when writing the last chapters of the novel. Another colleague of mine at USL knew someone whose father-in-law was sheriff of a small town. She asked me would I like to meet the sheriff. I think he was an ex-sheriff by now, but everyone still called him sheriff. When we arrived at the house, I was introduced to the sheriff, to his wife, and to another man. The sheriff's wife served coffee. I was served last, and I saw how much her hands shook when she served me. I was certain that she had never served coffee to a black man before, but after all, I had written the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman and also knew her daughter-in-law. So she was forced to show some form of her southern hospitality even towards me. The sheriff and the other man wanted to know where I came from, did I like the South, and how long had I been teaching at USL. I told them that I was born and raised about 60 miles from where we now sat, that my people had lived in that same parish since the time of slavery, and that I had been teaching at USL about 5 years, and I liked it very much. That relaxed them a bit, and we finished our coffee. I asked the sheriff the same question that I had proposed to the warden in my letter. Could someone who was not a close relative, who was not a minister of religion, or a legal advisor visit someone on death row? The sheriff told me that it would be entirely up to the discretion of the sheriff. He told me that the sheriff of the jail was totally in charge, that he made all the decisions. That bit of information was extremely vital. Now I had to find a reason to pressure my sheriff into allowing someone whom he may not even like visit the prisoner. As usual, my colleagues at the university would ask me how the novel was going, and when I tell them that I was still trying to get everything straight in my mind, they would offer advice. One fellow there, who considered himself a writer too, had an idea how to pressure the sheriff into letting someone visit. Find something on the sheriff that the sheriff did not want people to know about. I told him that sounded like blackmail, and I didn't want anything to do with that. He told me he had another idea. The sheriff's wife had had an abortion in the past. And you know how these Southerners feel about that. I told him I didn't care for that idea either. He said, well, let's say the sheriff's wife could have had a relationship with a black man and your character threatened to expose it. By God, that would light his fire. And more than likely get my character killed before he ever got to the jail. No thanks, I said. The original idea of the novel, when I thought the story would take place in the 80s, was that Grant, the narrator, would have been living in California, and he would come to Louisiana one summer to visit his aunt and eventually get involved with the young man on death row. That was the original reason for the questions about kin, legal advisor, or religious minister, because I'm sure neither warden nor sheriff would have allowed an outsider, especially someone from the North, interfering in their business. It was not until I decided that the story should take place in the 40s that I would make Grant a teacher who had gone away for his education and had returned to teach on the same plantation where he was born and raised and where all his people had lived for several generations. However, because he was educated, one of them smart ones, the sheriff still may not have wanted him to be there. My colleague at USL had given me an idea of how to solve my problem when he mentioned the sheriff's wife several times. No, I would not cause her to have had an abortion or a black lover, but I would put her in a position where she would pressure her husband into allowing Grant to visit Jefferson in the prison. On the plantation where I was born, my maternal grandmother worked at the big house as cook for many years. I myself had worked in the yard at the big house on several occasions, collecting eggs when the chicken had laid in the grass, gathering pecans and different fruits from the different trees. Now, suppose I made the sheriff's wife a member of such a family where my grandmother had worked all those years. Wouldn't she, my grandmother, would have done favors, extra favors, for members of that family? Wouldn't that be enough reason for her to feel that she could go to them for a favor? This, I thought, would be a much better reason and a more convincing reason to get the sheriff to allow my narrator to visit the prisoner. So I created two elderly women, Talu, the narrator's aunt, and Miss Emma, the prisoner's godmother. And these two would apply the pressure. And now I'd like to read a couple of scenes to illustrate how I use these two characters. In the first scene, they've just gotten Grant to take them up to the big house. I looked around the kitchen. I'd come into that kitchen many times as a small child to bring in wood for the stove, to bring in a chicken I had caught and killed, eggs I'd found in the grass, figs, pears, and pecans I had gathered from the trees in the yard. Miss Emma was the cook up there then. She wore the white dress and the white shoes and the kerchief around her head. She had been here long before I was born, probably when my mother and father were children. She had cooked for the old Pichots, the parents of Henri Pichot. She had cooked for Henri and his brother and sister, as well as for his nieces and nephews. He did not have children of his own. She cooked, she ran the house, my aunt washed and ironed, and I ran through the yard to get the things they needed to cook or cook with. As a child growing up on this plantation, I could not imagine this place, this house, existing without the two of them here. "What can I do for you, Emma?" Pichot asked. He seemed annoyed that he had been disturbed while he had a guest. "I want to ask you a favor, Mr. Henri," Miss Emma said. He drank from his glass and looked at her. "It's Jefferson," she said. "Yes, I heard," he said, and waited. "I want to ask you a favor." "I can't change what has been handed down by the court," he said. "I spoke up before the trial. I can't say any more." "Yes, sir," she said. "But that's not what I come to ask you for. I come to ask you something else." Miss Emma looked tired. She was tired. She wanted to sit down at the table, but no one had offered her a chair. I looked at the two white men who raised their glasses. Henri Pichot finished his drink and stuck out his hand. Inez, the maid, knew what it meant, and she came forward to get the empty glass. Then she turned to Louis Rougon, who had stuck out his glass, empty of everything except 2 or 3 small cubes of ice. She took the glasses to a liquor counter to refresh the drinks. "They call my boy a hog, Mr. Henri," Miss Emma said. "I didn't raise no hog. I don't want no hog to go sit in that chair. I want a man to go sit in that chair, Mr. Henri." He looked at her, but he didn't say anything. He's waiting for his drink. "I'm old, Mr. Henri," she went on. "Jefferson gonna need me, but I'm too old to be going up there. My heart won't take it. I want you to talk to the sheriff for me. I want somebody else to take my place." "That's up to you and Mr. Sam, isn't it?" Pichot said, and he took the drink off the tray that Inez held before him. "I need you to speak for me, Mr. Henri," Miss Emma said. "I want the teacher to visit my boy. I want the teacher to make him know he's not a hog, he's a man. I want him to know that when you go to that chair, Mr. Henri." Henri Pichot glanced at me, then looked back at her. "I done a lot for this family and this place, Mr. Henri," she said. "All I'm asking you to talk to the sheriff for me. I done a lot for this family over the years." "I can't promise you anything," he said, and sipped his drink. "You can speak to your brother-in-law." "And say what?" "I want the teacher to talk to my boy for me." He looked over ahead at me, standing back by the door. I was too educated for Henri Pichot. He had no use for me at all anymore. But just as Miss Emma had given so much of herself to that family, so had my aunt. So Henri Pichot, who cared nothing in the world for me, tolerated me because of my aunt. "I'll speak to him," he said, "but it's up to him, not me. Tell him what I done for this family, Mr. Henri. Tell him to ask his wife all I done for this family over the years." I said I would speak to him, Henri said, obviously becoming more and more impatient with her. "When?" she asked. Henri Pichot had started to raise his glass because for him the conversation was over. But when Miss Emma spoke again, his hand stopped inches away from his mouth, and he lowered the glass. "What?" "When?" "Whenever I see him, that's when," he said. "Now, if you don't mind, I have a guest." He drank and turned away. "Mr. Henri," Miss Emma called him, but he kept walking. "I'll be up here again tomorrow, Mr. Henri. I'll be on my knees next time you see me, Mr. Henri." But she was speaking to empty space. Henri Pichot and Louis Rougon were already in the library. The story of the radio and the notebook. After I'd gone so far into the novel and Jefferson still refused to communicate with anyone, I knew I had to find some way to make him talk. On that plantation where I lived as a child, on Saturday nights, the people at 1 or 2 of the houses in the quarter would give house fairs, or suppers, as they also called them. At these suppers, there would be food, drinks, music. The music coming from an old gramophone. In one of his visits to the jail, Grant mentions the music to Jefferson. When Jefferson shows some sign of interest, Grant promises to get him a radio. so that he could have the music anytime he wished. The idea of the radio was not planned, but it turns out to be a most important turn in the story. From that moment on, there was some, if limited, communication between the two of them. And now I'd like to read a little part from the book with the radio in mind. Reverend Ambrose came back in the quarter between 2:30 and 3 o'clock. And when I dismissed school, one of the boys came back to tell me that my aunt wanted to see me at Miss Emma's house before I went home. All three of them were sitting around the kitchen table when I came in. They'd already finished their coffee. The cups were still on the table, but empty. "You know what you done?" my aunt asked me. I could tell by her face and her voice that she's mad. "What did I do?" I asked her. "Why?" "Why what, Tonlu?" "That radio," she said. "That radio." "What's wrong with the radio?" "What's wrong with it?" Reverend Ambrose cut in. "What's wrong with it? That's all he do, listen to that radio. That's what's wrong with it." "What's wrong with that?" I asked. "He didn't have time to come sit down with us today. That's what's wrong with that," the minister said. "He ain't got time for nothing else. That's what's wrong with that." "Jefferson needs something in that cell," I said. "Yes, he do," the minister said. "You hit the nail on the head there, mister. Yes, he do, but not that box." "And what did you suggest, Reverend Ambrose?" I asked. "God," the minister said. "He ain't got but 5 more Fridays. He needs God in that cell, not that sin box." "What sin box?" "What you call that kind of music you listen to?" the minister asked. Us standing there trying to talk to him and him listening to that thing till she got to reach over and turn it off. "What you call that?" "I call it company, Reverend Ambrose. And I call it sin company." "I don't care what you call it," I said. "Grant," my aunt said. I could see that she was becoming more and more angry with me. Now she got up from her chair. "You don't talk like that," she said. "Never." "Louise," Miss Emma called to her. "Louise." "I didn't raise you that way," my aunt said, coming toward me. "Louise, please, Lord, don't," Miss Emma pushed up from her chair. My aunt stopped a step or two away from me, though it was clear she wanted to slap me. "We have to get something straight around here," I said. "And right now, I don't know a thing about God or sin, but what I do know is, my Lord," the minister said, looking at me as if I were the devil himself. "Listen to the teacher of our children. Last Friday," I continued, "was the very first time that Jefferson looked at me without hate, without accusing me of putting him in that cell. Last Friday was the first time he ever asked me a question or answered me without accusing me of his condition. I don't know if you all know what I'm talking about. It seems you don't. But I found a way to reach him for the first time. Now he needs that radio and he wants it. He wants something of his own before he dies. He wants a gallon of ice cream for his last supper. Did he tell you that? Did he tell you he never had enough ice cream? Did he tell you that he never had a radio of his own before? Did he tell you any of this? He wants those things before he dies. He has only a month to live, and all I'm trying to do is make it more comfortable for him. And after that radio and that ice cream, how about his soul?" my aunt asked. "I don't know a thing about soul," I said. "Yes, you do," she said. She tightened her mouth. She wanted to cry, and she wanted to slap me. Not only for this moment, but for all those years that I refused to go to church. "Yes, you do," she said, shaking her head, "because I raised you better than that." "And you sent me to him, Tonlu," I said, "and I'm only trying to teach him the best way that I can." "Turning him against God?" "Tonlu, that radio has nothing to do with turning Jefferson against God. That radio is there to help him not think about death. He's locked up in that cage like an animal. And what else can he think about for that last day and that last hour? That radio makes it less painful. Now, if you all want that radio out of there, you just go on and take it away from him. But I won't go back up there anymore. We got to have it your way or else. Is that it? Reverend Ambrose cut in. No, I said. You can have it your way. You can take it from him, but you won't reach him if you do. The only thing that keeps him from thinking he is not a hog and that is that radio. You take that radio away, and let's see what you do for his soul. Then I'm the one that's not needed, the minister said. No, Miss Emma said, you have to go, Reverend Ambrose. I'll make him see. You saw today how it was, the minister said. He can't hear me through that wall of sin. I'll make him see, Miss Emma said. He needs you. Maybe you don't know it yet, but he needs you. Maybe you don't know it yet either, Grant. All I know, Miss Emma, is that last Friday was the first time I reached him. It was the first time that he didn't call himself a hog.